Welcome back to The Fork in the Road, Season 2, Episode 3. This week, I had the pleasure to sit down with my friend Sunnie, who I also met in my ethics class that I took in the fall semester. Sunnie has been vegan for about a year, and he's hoping to show us why he chose this lifestyle, and hopefully you can learn something from it. So, I don't know about you, but I'm having a great time with the second season of The Fork in the Road so far. We're learning together, in my esteem. I know you guys aren't there, but you're there. You know what I'm saying? And I'm just enjoying it. So, I felt like I'd put my 2 cents in. Anyways, that's why I started the Patreon. And if you're enjoying the show as much as I am, and you'd like to support, it honestly would help tremendously. But regardless, there's 3 parts to this conversation. The first part, we talked about human versus non-human animal equality. We talked about the principle of equal consideration as seen by Peter Singer, who is an American or an English philosopher. We also talked about the issues with racism and sexism. In the second part, we talked about the principle of minimal consideration, sentience as a condition for moral reasoning. We argued about chimpanzees and a disabled person. And we talked about cheese. And then in the third episode, we talked about human alternatives to meat. We talked about humane alternatives to meat, hunting, and a livable vegan diet. So, I hope you guys are ready. Strap yourselves in. The next 3 weeks are going to go absolutely crazy. And I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for listening. You guys thought I was done, but I absolutely forgot, and I don't know how. They're going to win tonight, and that's all I have to say. If it doesn't happen, I'm taking the L, but they're going to win tonight, and I know it's going to happen. I don't even care about hockey, but look at that. That's way cooler than a barrel of oil. Come on. Go Flames. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know where I was going with that sentence, so I'm just going to move on because we're all about pivots here. I am here today to record an episode with a friend of mine named Sunnie. And Sunnie is going to tell you a little bit about himself and where he is from. But we met in the same philosophy class that I met Daniel in, who I've recorded the last 2 episodes with, and that was a privilege. So I'm hoping that trend continues and we can do some learning here together. Me and Sunnie, and obviously the rest of you, whoever decided to click on this and learn with us today. So, Sunnie, my friend, how is it going? And tell the audience of The Fork in the Road a little bit about yourself and what you've been learning.
Yeah, my name is Sunnie. I'm an econ and philosophy major. Met Keaton in my ethics class, and for a little more over a year now, I think, I've been vegan, trying my best not to consume any animal products. And the reason is, when I took the time to listen to the arguments, the moral arguments of like why you shouldn't eat animal products or support the production of them, I really felt like there was no escaping it, you know? Like it was just super convincing.
Almost self-evident, would you say?
Yeah. Just like really obvious that, to me, that it was the right thing to do. That like I had an obligation to do so.
Right. So, with that in mind, that's the premise of today's episode. We're going to be talking about the ethics of animal care, focusing on veganism and how, from the research that we've both done, all of the ethical and moral principles seem to lead to veganism. And I want to start off by saying Obviously, we're not saying this is the only way to live and this is the way you have to live. But Sunnie is going to provide his case, how he encountered these philosophies and how it became almost somewhat self-evident to him that becoming vegan was the only course of action. And I'm going to either support him or refute him, depending on how I feel about it. So, if you're ready, my friend, we have a couple of questions for you guys, and we can get into this nice little conversation.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome. That's what I like to hear. So we're going to start off with a question surrounding equality. And equality is a very broad subject, but in terms of, or for the focus of our conversation, we're going to be talking about equality between humans, equality across species, across races, etc. So the first question is, if all humans deserve equality, why don't all animals deserve equality? And I will let Sunnie go into his answer about this question.
Yeah, okay, so the first answer that might come to mind is humans are really similar to each other, but they seem very different to other animals, right? So, for example, sexism is whack because men and women, they have equal amounts of ability to think rationally, right? Like, they should both have the right to vote, for example, because they can both make rational decisions on how to vote, or at least equally rational decisions. But there's a problem with this. And the problem is there are major differences between groups of people too, right? Like, you actually have a good example of this, and I'll let you go into it.
So, my example for this is that according to Singer, and we're going to get into his principle, which a large majority of our argument is based on, which is the principle of equal consideration, says that, in my interpretation of the principle, not everybody is going to be getting the exact same amount. And for equal consideration, equality across species, across beings, what it really boils down to is that everybody gets what they need. So my example for this is that wheelchair users versus prototypical people, you're walking into a library, you're going to need a set of stairs for the quote-unquote prototypical people who can walk up and down the stairs. But a wheelchair user, fundamentally has a right because they are different, but they also need it to be able to get through the situation, to have an access ramp from the bottom to the entryway of the library. And at least in the education portion, this is called inclusive education, or at least that was the class that I was introduced to this subject in. So for me, it's really evident that you need to work to the outsides. You need to design to the outsides because, like Sunnie said, human beings are fundamentally very, very similar, but we're also day and night when it comes to our differences.
Yeah. So to go into that, or sum it up maybe, when we say equality, at least in this conversation, in this context, we don't mean like everybody should be treated exactly the same, right? We're saying that everybody's needs should be considered this, like, just as worthy as anybody else's. Yeah. So another example is like women typically can become pregnant and men typically cannot, right? So there is a need for women to have the right to abortion, whereas men typically do not, right? it it's not that like, because if men are given the right to abortion, then I mean,
It's logically inconsistent for us to fight for the right for abortion when we don't need abortion. We can't get pregnant.
yeah, it's like we don't have a use for it, right? Yeah, so different people have different needs, and if we're considering everybody's needs equally, then they'll end up having different rights.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest stipulations that Singer says, is that equal consideration of being, equal consideration is not the same as identity of treatment. So because these differences within ourselves are going to lead to different rights, then in reality, equal consideration between individuals is not doable. But equal treatment is doable, because at the end of the day, if you consider my needs, Sunny, and I fully consider your needs, then we're both getting exactly what we need. We're being treated equally. It is the sum of our point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moving into the equal consideration of well-being, according to Singer, the equal consideration of human well-being is the well-being of each innocent person is of equal intrinsic moral importance. So it doesn't matter if you're Obama or Joe, who lives on 3rd and Main in New York City on the corner, on the like on the street, homeless. Neither of them has more or less intrinsic moral importance when it comes to being a person. And I feel like, at least to me, that's self-evident. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, and in that case, like Obama would have like different needs, right? And different interests. And the homeless Joe has their own needs as well and their own interests. And the idea of equal consideration is we should no Obama's needs shouldn't be seen as more important than Joe's needs, right? They should be equally worthy of consideration, of our attention.
Exactly. And because of that fact, in general, there's like, if you're being consistent in your moral views, and for me, that's the adoption of the golden rule, there's no sense, no logic that leads to the mistreatment of anybody else. You cannot logically reason that you're of more intrinsic moral importance, thus you can treat somebody else badly to put yourself further, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's like there's no reason that you should be given special treatment, you're saying? Yeah, I agree.
And
Yeah.
then if you have something to say, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, Singer says that the only defensible way to put this into practice is to also give non-human animals this consideration as well. As in, the needs and interests of non-human animals should also be seen as equally worthy of consideration, of considering as humans, human interests are.
And there might be reason or backlash immediately as soon as you hear that, but we're going to break down why Singer has this view and why we also hold this view. So moving on to the second question. This really brings us to two of the biggest issues in society for hundreds and hundreds of years, that being racism and sexism. So obviously, at face value, everybody understands what's wrong with racism and sexism. But we're really going to explore that because humans differ in such things as like moral capacities, intelligence, empathy, communication skills, etc., the capacity to experience pleasure and pain is of intrinsic importance when it comes to how we're going to treat somebody else. And that is the root of the problem with racism and sexism. But I'll allow you to break that answer down into something more digestible.
Okay, yeah. So if we ask ourselves what's wrong exactly with racism and sexism, somebody, let's say a racist, for example, might point to the fact that humans are not built equal, right? Different humans have different levels of intelligence, empathy, etc., different skills.
Right.
And they would say that the presence of these differences justifies differences in treatment, or in our case, differences in the amount of consideration that they deserve, you know? So the question then is, how could we respond to this racist? Actually, hold on. The racist would probably then extrapolate from there that it's their race that, you know, tends to have a higher level of whatever aspect of intelligence or whatever, and thus like deserve more consideration. Their well-being should be is deserving of more consideration than other races' well-being, for example. Yeah. So how do we answer this racist? How do we debunk this racist? The first answer we might give is, well, in terms of intelligence and skills and whatever, races are the same. Like, the white race is, yeah, we might say the white race is just as intelligent as the black race, and they're just as intelligent as any other race, right? And the same goes for sexism,
Right?
where, you know, all sexes are exactly the same in terms of intelligence or skills or whatever, you know. But there's that answer comes with its own problems. For example, what if there were differences between races and sexes in terms of intelligence and other things, for example? Like, what if there were data to show that I'm Asian Canadian, by the way. What if there were data to show that Asian people had lower IQ scores than another race of people, right? Would that justify like prioritizing other races' well-being over the well-being of Asian people? What do you think?
Well, I mean, anybody who says anything other than no is just out of pocket. But I feel like there's a fundamental reason for it, right? If you really break it down, if I put myself in the shoes of Sunnie, in Sunnie's shoes for a day, and I become that Asian Canadian, and in this hypothetical scenario, we are of an IQ level lower than everybody else on average, in general, on average, then I would not want to be treated with any less moral, or ethical, or just in general respect than anybody else. So if I am in the position of superiority, it would be inconsistent for me to say, yeah, that's fine, that's cool, it makes sense. But that's just my 2 cents.
You're saying like if you were part of the group of people that were considered superior, it would be like that would be a biasing factor.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'd agree. And even if like the data said that all races and all sexes were the same in terms of intelligence and all these different skills, right? One could still say, or the person who's interested in like dividing people into superior and inferior people, they could still say, okay, what if I just use IQ directly? Anybody with over 100 IQ is superior, and anybody who is under 100 IQ is inferior. And the people with IQ over 100, their well-being should be prioritized over the well-being of people with IQ under 100. Would that really be better than would that be better than racism? Would that be more objective than racism or sexism?
We have our own objections. Clearly, to me, you could fit the exact same example I presented in this case as well. If I have 100 IQ points on Monday, I wake up on Tuesday and I have 98 IQ points. I don't want to be treated like garbage on Tuesday just because I'm below the average. So it would be inconsistent, at least in my view, when I have 100 IQ points to treat people like garbage. So that was my position on why intellectual ability shouldn't matter. But if intellectual ability or IQ, as per your example, isn't the determinative factor as to what gives us gives us moral and ethical value, there needs to be a reason why. And we'll get into an argument later. Yes, that was my problem. I hadn't scrolled. We'll get into an argument later that Singer explores as to why intelligence cannot be the factor that we work off of. But I know that you have some ideas on what we could also put forth as a factor.
I think most any factor would be arbitrary, right? Like, it's weird that we choose intelligence as the factor, like when it could easily be like physical strengthism, like
Right.
only ripped people's well-being should be prioritized over scrawny people. Or like, what about height?
Mm-hmm.
People over 6 feet, their well-being should be prioritized over people under 6 feet. That might sound weird, but like, why intelligence? It just seems convenient because we think of ourselves as intelligent.
Exactly. And Singer said that this was a self-affirming bias that we chose. We were just like, intelligence is the factor we chose because humans ended up becoming apex predators, at least in my view, because of our enhanced cognitive abilities. So while I cannot argue with the fact that we have higher cognitive abilities than a majority of the animal kingdom, I don't believe across sexes, across races, across religions, that gives us a reason to say we're any more or less intrinsically, morally important than anybody or anything else. So, yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we can move on to this argument that really, I guess, really challenges the idea that intelligence is what justifies us in prioritizing human well-being over non-human animals' well-beings, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay, so the argument is pretty much that if we use intelligence as the reason, the justification to prioritize human well-being over animal well-being, or to say that we're justified in treating animals however we want, then we have to ask ourselves, what about humans who are of similar intelligence to animals, right? So, like, one example could be infants, right? Dogs, and maybe there's a bunch of like animals, including dogs, maybe even like chimpanzees, you know?
That's
a bunch of
shot
examples.
In the dark, but yes. We have no clue. We're advising you, blind leading the blind right now.
Okay. There's a bunch of animals that clearly, as shown through scientific evidence, like have at least as much intelligence as like an infant, as a human infant, right?
Okay, I don't mean to intrude so late in the conversation, but I've been looking up articles to back up what Sunny just said, and I haven't found any direct connections, but there's this thing called the Fagan test of infant intelligence. That's a test designed to assess visual recognition memory based on time that an infant spends looking at a novel stimulus, according to the medical dictionary. So they have used this test on monkeys. So animal models of cognitive functioning can be created, but this doesn't seem to be something that is being studied like a lot recently. So I apologize. I just didn't want us to be making any outlandish claims without at least an attempt at trying to back them up. Anyways, enjoy the rest of the conversation.
And then you could say, the hater could say, well, infants have the potential of becoming more intelligent, right? Like, they're gonna grow up if we, if all proper care is taken. They're gonna grow up to be a being that is far more intelligent than a dog, right? But what about people, humans, who don't have that potential? What if that baby, that infant, has like a
cognitive brain trauma?
What if like even it has like a terminal illness where like it's not going to survive that long? Or what about fully grown humans who are like intellectually disabled? Are we justified in treating them in the same way as we treat non-human animals because they have similar, if not less, intelligence than they do, right? At least
right.
Some of them.
And then from this statement, this argument of the less abled humans, of the infants, it's clear to me at least that intelligence, it's just as implausible to base our moral importance off intelligence just as it would be to base it off of our sex, off of our race, off of our species, as we talked about. So that last point about our species flows very nicely into the bare species membership clause that Peter Singer brought up, which really asks the question, can we deny animal rights on the basis of intelligence without denying the same rights to humans of similar intelligence? So could we find a loophole in the less abled humans argument? And in my opinion, at least, this would be speciesism. Bare species membership affects the intrinsic moral importance of an individual's well-being. So since it affects who we are and how we are valued intrinsically, by saying I am Keaton Taylor and I am a human being, therefore I have more intrinsic value than the jackrabbit that runs across the road, therefore I can hit it instead of doing everything in my power not to hit it. That would be logically inconsistent in my view.
Mm-hmm.
So, unless you have anything else to say, I'll talk about how Singer talks about their species membership.
Yeah. In my interpretation, he's just saying like the only reason that we put humans on the pedestal, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is because we belong to the same species. Like, we judge beings based on their species and their species alone, and then we use that to determine whether or not they're worthy of moral consideration. And that's, that's a discriminating on the basis of species.
Mm-hmm.
Speciesism.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.